In this example, I would encourage you to graph this particular function using either your graphing calculator or Desmos. But more specifically, I would encourage you to use Desmos. So here we have y equals 2x plus 1. I want to use interval notation to record the domain and range of this function. Now, what I'd like to do first is I'd like to go ahead and graph this function. So y equals 2x plus 1 looks something like that. Now, looking at this graph, we have a point right here where the input is 0, the output is 1. Notice how 0 is in the domain of this function and 1 is in the range of this function. When, for example, the input is 2, the output's going to be 5. So 2 is in the domain, 5 is in the range. Well, we would also have a point in between there, right? So when the input is 1, the output is 3. So 1 is in the domain and 3 is in the range. Now notice in this case, these are just 3 distinct points. But in fact, in between each of these points, there's also a whole bunch of other points. And in this case, there are an infinite number of points in between these points. So there's no way that I can list all the x-coordinates on this graph. Because even between 0 and 1, there's an infinite number of x-coordinates. For example, 0.1, 0.11, 0.111, 0.1111, and I can go on forever. So there's an infinite number of x-coordinates here, but notice how also this graph keeps going up and over. So the x-coordinates keep going towards this way, towards positive infinity. And the graph keeps going down and over, and so the x-coordinates keep going to negative infinity in this direction. So how we represent that in interval notation, the domain is going to be parenthesis, negative infinity, comma, infinity, close parenthesis. Now, the parentheses in this case means to not include the endpoints. Well, we never include infinities because they're not numbers themselves in our real number system. They're just representations that the numbers continue on in those directions. So one thing when considering domain, you're looking at the x-coordinates of the graph, you have to consider going left to right. How far to the left does this graph go? Well, it keeps going forever. How far to the right does this graph go? Well, it keeps going up and over forever. Now, range is the y-coordinates, so we want to think about up and down. How low does this graph go? Well, notice the y-coordinates keep going down and down and down, and in fact, they keep going down to negative infinity. Now, in terms of going up, the y-coordinates keep going up and up and up. So in terms of going up, they're going to positive infinity. This is the domain and range in interval notation for that particular function. Okay, let's consider the function y equals x squared minus 2. Now there's just a rough graph of it, and it actually touches down there at negative 2. So thinking about the domain in interval notation, again the graph goes up, but it also goes up and it goes up and over this way. So the domain, what's the farthest left x-coordinate? Well, the x-coordinates keep going this way to the left, so the domain's going to start at negative infinity. And to the right, it keeps going to the right, so it's going to be to positive infinity. Now the range, on the other hand, there is a lowest y value. There is a lowest output, and in this case, the lowest output is negative 2. And negative 2 is an actual output because when the input is 0, the output is negative 2. Now, I want to include that point, so I'm going to use a bracket. So a bracket means to include, a parenthesis means to not include. So the lowest y-coordinate is negative 2, but the highest y-coordinate keeps going up and up in both of these directions. It doesn't matter which one, just one has to go up. And it goes up to infinity. And so there's my domain and range for that example. Now, if you were to try to graph this equation in your graphing calculator, you actually wouldn't be able to graph this. Now, Desmos, you can type it in just like it is, and Desmos will actually be able to graph this quite nicely. This is not a function because it does not pass the vertical line test. However, it does have a domain and range. Now, domain, we want to think x-coordinates when we think left and right. So, what's the farthest left x-coordinate? In this case, it's going to be 0. And I am going to include 0 because it is on the graph. So I'm going to do a bracket, 0, and then it keeps going to the right forever. So I'm going to do infinity. Now the range, this graph goes to the right, but it also goes down, and this graph goes to the right, but it also goes up, and it keeps going down forever and keeps going up forever. So then the range is going to be negative infinity to infinity.